Hello everybody, welcome into my latest live video. Today is the 20th of July. It's a little late in the day, so it's probably a little darker in here than it normally is when I broadcast, but I've been running very far behind in my workload, and so I'm doing what I have to do to get caught up and trying to include you guys in as much of the process as possible. So a little later in the day, so I work away from the Coca-Cola, more into the Gatorade. We've actually had a under 100 degree Fahrenheit day today. It was cloudy, had a little tiny bit of rain, just a little teeny tiny, just for a brief moment, which was nice. And I'm still inside anyway. But still, we should have a nice, decent week this week in Phoenix when it's normally miserable. So I'll take it. Today, you will see a familiar computer here. This is the Lian Li, the TU-150 that I did for a friend of mine who lives out in Illinois. If you're not familiar with the United States, he's about 2,000 miles away from me. And when I shipped it to him, I expected he was going to be happy for many years. Unfortunately, it started locking up right on day one. It would freeze, and there was no pattern to it. I tried diagnosing as best he can with what he has available, and I sent him some new RAM. I sent him some of this G.Skill Ripjaws RAM in the hopes that this would solve the random freezing, but it did not. So he sent the RAM back to me. This is the MSI Gaming Plus AC Mini ITX board that I selected, and one of the reasons I stopped using MSI years ago was I had motherboards catch fire. They were MSI boards, all the same model. 3 different customers called me within a span of a month, and they all had the exact same problem. MSI said it without even looking at the board. They just said it's your power supply. Now, all 3 customers had completely different power supplies. The customers don't know each other, and MSI refused to honor the warranty on those boards. Now, being a small businessman, what am I supposed to do, right? I had to buy my customers new boards, which cost me more than the amount of profit I made selling the system, but I had to do the right thing. I don't have the millions of dollars MSI has, and I could afford to do the right thing. Why couldn't they? So I stopped using MSI. Now, back in the day, you could choose other manufacturers that you really don't see around, like A-Bit has gone out of business. But MSI has continued to grow in popularity and has been very well reviewed and respected by numerous tech publications, Tom's Hardware, Maximum PC Magazine, on and on and on and on. And I thought, well, maybe it's time to revisit MSI and see if things have changed. My business doesn't make the kind of profits where I can afford to revisit companies that abandon me when I need them the most very often. I can take a couple hits, and if the hits are coming without a break in between, that's it, I'm down, and there's no getting back up. But enough time had passed, I thought I'd revisit MSI, and did a board, an ATX style board that was sold to a gentleman out in Oregon. He's still very happy with it, no problems. And then I did this mini ITX board, and we're having these random freezes. So I'm going to RMA this motherboard back to MSI, or rather, I'm going to attempt to. And I expect at a bare minimum the type of RMA process Gigabyte offers, which is not good. When I send something back to Gigabyte, the communication's very bad. They're not very forthcoming with information, and they often take 2 to 3 days to respond, and the amount of time it takes for them to ship the product back is a bit longer than other manufacturers. When I RMA things back to EVGA or to Corsair, I have found the customer service to be excellent, expedient, and clear. That being said, at the end of the day, as long as I get a product back and all I'm paying for is the shipping to return it, good communication or bad, at least it got done. When MSI completely flat out denied me the RMAs without so much as looking at the boards, it was just a business decision to say, I can't take this risk. I can't afford to buy my customers new motherboards that are under warranty and eat the cost because there's not enough profit margin in PC building to make up for that expense, not to mention the additional time and effort that's required to pick up the PC, do the work, and then redeliver the PC again. So for that reason, I'm not going back to MSI on the replacement board. Instead, and only because this is going to a friend of mine, I wouldn't do this to a customer. That sounds terrible. Boy, you really look out for your friends. Well, here's the thing. My friends can be my guinea pigs, voluntarily and knowingly. They can experiment and join me in me stepping outside of my normal comfort zone of what I know to be reliable and decent to try things that are unknown to me. And I don't want to do that to a paying customer. So if a friend is willing to say, yeah, send me the box, I'll check it for you, and then report back to me any problems and work with me on it, then it helps me to expand or not to expand my product offerings to clients based on those real life experiences. And so for that reason, I bought some returned product. So Amazon has what they call the Amazon warehouse, and that's where items are returned for numerous reasons. And especially with computer parts, people often don't know what the heck they're doing and they order the wrong part or they install it completely wrong and they think they got a bad part. And Amazon's really, really good with returns. And I don't think Amazon really does much in testing product that comes back other than perhaps making sure that it does a post. Like they'll slap a CPU and some RAM in it. Does it post? It's fine. Put it back in the box, resell it, give it a discount because it's been used. It's now a used product. And in most cases, I think the products are fine. So we're going to find out. So I had a couple of used product I bought, and my friend Ron said, let's go with the Asus board. So we've got the Asus Aorus B450i. It's a mini ITX board, obviously. This is also a B450. I wanted to stay with the B450 chipset. I think it's ideal for the Ryzen chip we've got in there, the 3600X, I think is what we put in there. I've got the parts list to everything we built in here in the video notes below this video. And this was an upgrade from the previous mini ITX system I built for the same friend 6 years ago, which is also linked in the video notes below this video, so you can watch the original build in the original case, where we came from to where we are now and why. So that's all there for you to peruse at your leisure. And welcome in everybody. Hello to all my friends in blue, and thanks for joining me again. And let's see what we can do here to get this thing done, because I have a stack of work and every one thing I can do to take another thing off my list, I'm grabbing it. Every little step eventually will add up to a mile. So it's progress, slow progress, but progress. And that's why I'm running so late today. So we're going to start just by removing everything from the board and dismantling what we've done, which is a real shame considering I just did it. But this is part of the business. It's something you have to do from time to time. Ideally, through building dozens or hundreds of computers, you will learn which components tend to fit better, work better, are more reliable, less troublesome, less finicky. And that's why I choose the products I choose, is through that experience. The problem is, over time, if you're not expanding your horizons and you're still doing the same offerings that you were doing 2 or 3 years ago, it's tough to be competitive in the marketplace, and you may not be offering your customers the best solutions because of ignorance in refusing to open your mind up to other experiences. Companies change quite frequently. What is a great company can become a bad company through changed leadership, and then the leadership can change again and it can become a great company again. And if you just say, well, that company's bad, and you never revisit them, the person you may be punishing is you. So for that reason, I like to, from time to time, go outside of my comfort zone and things that I know to be reliable and meet all of my requirements for customer builds, to make sure that I'm still accurate in my assessments. And so when I have these opportunities to try different product and I can loan it to a friend or give it to somebody so that they can use it every day and report back to me, that saves me a lot of research and development time that I would have to do on my own. And quite frankly, it just wouldn't be possible unless I just like made every new machine with new parts my own desktop computer and did all that work. And there's, again, not enough profit in the PC building business to really justify that much time and research. If you are a specialist in your building, really highly customized, like overclock machines like Anthony Remus does at Remus Computer Solutions, I think you'll find his prices are very different because of how much time as well as the kind of inventory he's got to keep on hand to honor a warranty for up to 3 years. So even if the motherboard was stopped being manufactured, he's still got to have it if a customer needs it long after the fact. So for that reason, he's got to charge more. He's also putting a lot more time in. Then at the same time, he's not competing with Dell or HP on price because he's doing what they won't do. So for that reason, he can make a lot more profit than I can, but he's also working a lot harder than I work. So, there is that. Now, as I recall, there were no screws required to pop these panels off. Yeah, they just pop off very easily. There's one panel. Let's grab the other panel and pull that. We obviously need to get to both sides of this case to work on it. And we've got the ADATA drive there in the back, which I didn't care for that design because how do you upgrade that? If this cutout was larger, that'd have been great, but it isn't. So, changing that drive for any reason requires removing the whole motherboard. With the Asus board we've got here, the M.2 drive will go traditionally in the front. I don't think there's anything in the back. And that in and of itself is enough reason for me to want to change the board. You'll see we're running the stock AMD cooler. I can't remember. Did we do the 3600X? It came with a cooler? Usually they don't. I'm confusing Intel with AMD. Just looking through the chat here. Welcome in again, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, AdLink was the name of the SSD there. Okay. I love taking things apart. I'm really, really good at taking things apart. It's putting them back together. That takes time. But taking things apart, you don't really need to know anything. If you just pay attention to where the screws are and where the little clips are, you can pretty much dismantle just about anything. Anything that can be put together, I assure you, it can be taken apart. Putting it back together requires some skill. So this part's super easy. All I have to do is unplug everything plugged into the board. There's our USB 3 cable. Got a cable up here at the top. Let me get this video card out of here. There's a little release lever all the way in the back, which is impossible to get. What I generally recommend people do is kind of rock the card a bit back and forth. And I'm going to need a flashlight. In fact, since I got the batteries and I got these lights, let's try them out. These are the lights that were sent to me. Was it Tom Jackson that sent these? I can't remember who sent these. They're pretty bright. We'll see if we can't utilize one today. See if that helps at all. There's a little release mechanism back here, back behind the board. There it is. Actually, that is not too difficult to get to. And then again, I rock. Oh, I've got to remove this thumb screw right here. Also holds the cards in place. So we just need to loosen that and move it back. Now the card should just pop right out. Now you'll see this graphics card. This is a Zotac GeForce GTX. Oh, I can't remember which model this was. Did we go with the 1660? Yeah, it's a 1660 Super. It's 6 gigs of RAM on there. We'll just set that over there for now. There's our front port audio header and power switch, reset switch, all that's right up here in this corner. Normally it's in the lower right corner on the regular ATX and micro ATX boards, but because this is mini ITX, it's just a little bit different. And then we've got the Chromax fans that we upgraded on this case, one here and one here, and those are connected via the single fan header this motherboard offered up here at the top. And I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else connected to the board. The RAM and the CPU fan can stay on. CPU power, can I not take that off yet? Let's see. Yeah, CPU power is right up in this corner. That's a fun one to get to on all motherboards. But at least on the TU-150 case here, they've given us quite a bit more room than the previous TU-100 case, which was quite a bit smaller and more difficult to work within. There's only 4 screws that hold in a mini ITX board. There's one in each corner. 1. 2. These cables are a little in my way, so I'm going to move them out just a little bit here so I can see better. The screw I want is just a bit of ways, about an inch away from the corner. There's 3. There's 1 screw left holding the board in. If I unscrew that, the board may just fall flat out. Not that that would be terrible because the board's not working anyway, but generally want to avoid that. So when I unscrew this last screw, I'm going to hold the board by the heat sink of the CPU fan, and then I'm going to gently guide it out. And with these cables laying around, they're kind of randomly hooking around the motherboard. But that's our board. And on the back, you'll see the AddLink drive. I have to hold it the right way. How about like that? Now you can see it. So the AddLink S70 is the drive that we used. Yeah, it's a good looking motherboard. It's a shame it's given us such grief. Well, it just goes to show you. It's not always just about the looks, you know. If it doesn't work well, what difference does it make how good it looks? All right, so those are the 4 screws that we're going to reuse once more when we put the other motherboard in. And I'm going to remove this RAM. Now, my friend Ron tells me that one of these RAM modules tested is bad, but what we really don't know is if the RAM itself is bad, if the motherboard being bad is causing the RAM to say it's bad, or if the socket is bad, anything like that. So we're going to take all the RAM, CPU out, etc. Normally there's a little cover that goes over the CPU when you're going to send a board back, but that's for Intel. On AMD systems, you don't have that because it's a different type of a socket. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the heatsink. And then there we go with that. And then we'll take the CPU out. This is the Ryzen, I don't know what it is. It's a little goopy. I'm going to grab a paper towel because it's got the thermal compound on it. And I'll tell you what, because we're putting the exact same heatsink on the exact same CPU, there's no reason for me to clean the thermal material off and reapply it because it's going to go right back exactly as it was without any concern of contamination or blending. Like, you don't want to blend two different thermal materials together. We don't have to worry about full coverage because, again, the heatsink's going to go right back on exactly like it was. There's no harm in changing the thermal compound. I mean, you could do it just to do it. But on a brand new machine, reapplying the thermal compound, like Henry Cavill did that when he did his build. He noticed he had his water pump upside down. All the words were upside down. And when he took it off, he cleaned it, and then he reapplied thermal compound, and he rotated it 180 degrees and put it back on. He could have simply rotated it 180 degrees and put it back on without removing and reapplying the thermal compound. He only had it on there for a few hours. So I'm not exactly sure what the thought process is there. Clearly, if it's an older machine or you're changing the CPU or the heatsink, you definitely want to clean and reapply the thermal material. But if it's a brand new build and all you're doing is rotating the heatsink, everything's fine. You don't have to reapply. You can if you want to. You don't have to. It's not required. Finally, I'm going to take the M.2 drive out of there. I have my JIS screwdriver for that. This is the Hosen Japanese industrial standard driver. I have a link to the whole kit of these on Amazon. But every once in a while, if you search for that model number on the driver, it says Hosen D550-100. You'll find these for about $10 on Amazon. That's with shipping. And I think it's a great $10 screwdriver. And it works wonderful when you're working on laptops or putting on these M.2 screws. They have a very small head on them. And once more, we're just going to pull the drive out. And I'm going to put the screw back into the standoff so that it doesn't get lost, because it is a very small screw. We'll just put it right back in. There's usually a serial number on the board. Sometimes, like on the edge of the power connector, you might find a serial number there. Or sometimes on some motherboard manufacturers, it's on the bottom PCI slot or PCIe slot, depending on the manufacturer. So that's the information we're going to need when we go online to fill out the RMA. That's going to have all of the product information they're going to request. See, that's why you don't have to have the original box. Some people, they save every box. It's ridiculous. So warranty status doesn't require the box. It's important that it's shipped properly. In other words, you have it in an anti-static bag with 2 inches of, generally speaking, 2 inches of protection of foam or packing peanuts, something all the way around, 2 inches all the way around. And then, of course, you ship it with something that has a tracking number so that you can verify that they received it. And of course, you choose whether or not you want to insure it in case it were to get lost in shipping. Rusty Nails just contributed $20. He says, it's a late night computer build, refreshing to see you on my schedule. Stay healthy and stay safe. Well, thank you, Rusty Nail. I appreciate that. And I'm glad that you could join us tonight. Ian McLeod contributed $2 and says, Slancha, Ian. And David R. Officer with $10 Canadian says, what do you think of customer service for Asus boards? I have not had an experience with returning an Asus board. Oh, yes, I have. Oh, yes, I have. What happened was I mailed an Asus board for RMA, and I included those little screws because because I'm used to installing Gigabyte boards, Gigabyte has them pre-installed on the board. You take the motherboard out of the box, and the screws are already in the standoffs. Asus, on the other hand, likes to package each little M.2 screw and each little M.2 standoff in its own little individual plastic bag that's included in the accessories in the motherboard box. And I did not know that. So when the motherboard manufacturer says, hey, we're going to honor the warranty, but take your stuff off the board, of course I take the CPU off, I take the RAM off, I take the M.2 drive out, and I left the screws in the M.2, intentionally put them back in, thinking when they send me a board, I'm going to get the standoffs and screws. I did not. But what was weird is Asus, when they sent me back the board, they also sent me an I/O shield. I wrote to somebody higher up in Asus. I'm trying to remember how I got their contact information, but it was somebody that was like they were like in charge of something. They weren't just a drone. They were in management. And I said, explain this to me. Why is it I sent you a board with the M.2 screws. You didn't send me back M.2 screws. I don't know where to get any. They're very difficult to find. And why in the world would you send me an I/O shield? I did not send you the I/O shield, nor did I mention that I needed one or that there was anything wrong with the one I had. And they said to me that the M.2 screws are considered an accessory and not a part of the board, and I was not supposed to send them back with the board. Okay, but I did. So now what? He said, with regards to the I/O shield, I have no idea why anybody would have sent you that. That's not part of our procedure. It doesn't make any sense, and I'll look into it. In the meantime, I'll ensure that you get the two M.2 screws, and about a week later, without hesitation, may not even have been a week, it might have been 3 or 4 days, they were sent. But if it was a gigabyte board, then the screws would have been pre-installed. I mean, I don't know how they expect you to know this. And furthermore, I don't know why they wouldn't play it safe, they being Asus, and just send the damn M.2 screws anyway. What am I going to do? Have too many? What, do they cost too much money to send? It's preposterous. It should not be considered an accessory. It is a requirement, because without those screws, you have no way to secure an M.2 drive. So to say it's an accessory is a bit of a stretch. What I don't like about Asus and many Asus users when it comes to their forums is they're nerds. They're engineers and nerds, and they only care about things engineers and nerds care about. They speak in a language for engineers and nerds, regardless of your level of being a customer. There's this assumption that what geeks and nerds want is what they should make. And if you're an average consumer, then your opinion doesn't matter. That's the thing that bothers me the most about Asus. And when you bring it up to Asus and you mention that you guys are highly technical and you're doing things in a way that average people can't make heads or tails of, they refer back to their forums as the source of the suggestions they get that they're honoring. But those people participating in the forums aren't mom and pop Joe user, They are technical people. And Asus directs all of their answers to be the desire of their customer. The problem is the customer's desire is only being vocalized by a group technical enough who know how, right? Your average Asus motherboard owner doesn't know what a forum is, let alone how to participate in it, nor do they have any desire. So when I try to represent the average user, they blow me off. Asus in general just says, yeah, okay, whatever. Because I'm like a lone voice. I'm speaking on behalf of probably the vast majority of people who purchase their products are not technical people. But a lot of technical people who purchase their boards choose Asus, and they get on the forums, and they dominate those forums with their nerdiness. And so Asus thinks that represents all of their customers, or the vast majority. I disagree. And the vast majority don't know how to speak to Asus. That bothers me. I don't see any reason why you can't do both. I don't think one customer is more important than another. There's got to be a way to meet in the middle, and they have no interest in it, because until those people get a voice, and learn how to talk to ASUS, ASUS assumes they don't exist. As far as ASUS is concerned, from all I can tell, only the people in the forums are their customers. And since all those people are nerdy technical types, that's who they appeal to, and that's who they will answer to. And when you ask them why they do something so bizarre, they say that's because that's what their users want. Well, that's what a portion of their users want. But unless ASUS is calling people up, calling up customers or emailing customers directly, and giving regular non-technical people the easy opportunity to respond with concerns, then they're just hearing what they want to hear. And there's no sort of, hey, thank you for the information, we'll look into it. It's just flat out, you're wrong. Kerry, you're wrong. You're not speaking on behalf of those people because those people don't exist. Just look in our forums. They can't put it together, or they refuse. So I have a little bit of an issue with the way ASUS conducts themselves and the logic behind why they do it. And furthermore, any suggestion to improve that or to modify it to be more end user friendly is sort of scoffed at. What do I know? I just a user. I got a visitor. Hold on a second. I got a big hairy spider. He does not look friendly. Let's see what we got. He's going to not live much longer. Where is he? I'm sure my friend Ron wants that one. Oh, he's going to get behind the sucker. I don't know if I got him. All right. Deal with that guy later. I love living in the desert. Boy, start talking about the web and look what happens. Spider pig. Yeah, my friend Ron would probably want to put it in a, what do you call it? Not an aquarium. Don't kill it. Well, I mean, it's usually him or me, right? So it needs to go. But he's under the refrigerator, so I guess he can. Spiders eat a lot of other bugs, and they can be good. But that particular spider didn't look like a daddy long legs. That looked like a dangerous spider. Ron says it's not a brown recluse. I don't know what it is, but it's big, ugly, nasty looking spider. Did not look like he wanted to be petted. David Starbucks contributed $20. He says, hey, Kerry, do you remember the gigabyte NVMe drive that didn't play nice with the X470 board you used in a build? My brother and I had the same issue, and I swapped it out for an 8-data drive, and it worked fine. David, I never used a gigabyte NVMe drive. The first one I used ever was on this motherboard. Where did I do with the motherboard? Oh, I used it on this board, the gigabyte 1 terabyte NVMe drive, because it was $119, and it was the cheapest of the 1 terabyte NVMe drives I could find. There was another that was also $119.99, and I decided to go with gigabyte to try it. And it froze up this entire computer. That's when I switched it out for A data. But now, since this motherboard's been freezing, I think it was the board all along, because I used that same gigabyte NVMe drive on an Intel H370 build, which I think I still have sitting here in the kitchen, and it works just fine. So I think I mistakenly misdiagnosed that gigabyte NVMe drive as something being incompatible. I looked for a firmware update. But when you combine the fact that the gigabyte drive did not work on this MSI B450i Gaming Plus AC motherboard, and combine it with the fact that now my friend Ron says one of the RAM modules says it's bad, even though I sent him 2 new RAM modules that didn't fix the freezing, I think we're kind of left with what appears to be a bad motherboard. And then when you take that gigabyte drive out and you put it into a different motherboard, and in this case it was an Intel H370 board, it worked just like you would expect it to. The same exact drive that didn't work in this board worked fine in another. I think I've got a bad motherboard. You may also have a bad motherboard. My question for you would be, is it an MSI motherboard? Wolf spiders. Yeah, that might have been a wolf spiders. It looked like one. You should see some of the spiders in Oz. I've heard, I've heard spiders in Australia can be large. Still, it's not a camel spider. Frankie B has contributed $50. Very generous, Frankie. Thank you for your continued generosity and support of the channel. It means a lot to me, and it certainly helps a lot. Sharon Idle says she's got a gigabyte solid state drive on her spare computer and has no complaints. Trev Good says, Carrie, big fan. I built a beast of a rig based on one of your videos. Keep up the good work. I'll be watching. Nice. Thank you. Rich Warner says, hello. Welcome in, Rich. The Drunk Control says, the word you were looking for is terrarium. Yes, I have no doubt my friend Ron would want that spider and put it in a terrarium. Me, not so much. They're welcome to be outside, but not in my house. It's behind me. I'm way bigger than that spider. It should be very afraid of me. Like if I was that spider and I was looking at a creature that weighed like 1,000 times more than I did and was 10,000 times larger than me, I probably would run away from it. But I'm funny that way. David Starbucks contributed $20. He said, yes, it's an MSI board, but the A data drive is chugging right along. And the Gigabyte NVMe is working great in my brother's old X99 system. Ooh, well, that's an interesting revelation because if Gigabyte NVMe drives have a compatibility with MSI motherboards, you'd think we'd hear about it by now, right? That's a very strange coincidence. Alex says, I just copied your build from August 28th, 2019, and the title was A Computer Build to Last for the Next 8 Years. And it was my very first PC build that inspired me to build a PC. Right on, that's fantastic. Solifugids are a blast to keep. I don't know what that word is, but you can have them all. Take mine. A spare computer is one that doesn't work. It's one that's not doing work. Slight difference. John says, you're mentioning that your initial diagnosis of the gigabyte drive may have initially been wrong. It's so refreshing. Diagnosing is so difficult, and I know the viewers appreciate it. Oh, I'm not going to get it right every time. And in fact, it might be more 50-50. That being said, it's all about sharing the lessons with you. It doesn't really matter if I'm right or I'm wrong. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to educate you. And so as I'm learning, I hope you're learning with me so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to repeat all the same steps because my instructions weren't clear. Because I never make mistakes and I never do anything wrong. That would be a hard example to live up to and to expect yourself to be able to do. So it's just not realistic. But thank you. And John Rudgis just contributed $20 to the channel, and thank you for that. Let's go back to prepping the new board. So I've got everything off of the off of the initial board that was in there. You'll see it doesn't take very long. It's a pretty quick process to break it down. And I know in my mind when I think about it, I'm like, oh, I got to take something apart that I just put together. But it really amounts to about 4 minutes worth of work. So I probably spent 4 minutes of me going up, you know what I mean? Than the actual time it took to do it. The back plate that stays with the motherboard. So I'm just going to stick it back there for right now. And I will have to put the little plastic pieces. Remember how I said not to throw those out? Because when you send the board back for RMA, it's quite possible that they send it back saying you didn't send us the board the way you bought it. In other words, if it had those little plastic pieces, that the retention plates that hold down the bracketed CPU coolers, you need to put that back on. Otherwise, it's effectively like theft if you think about it. If you buy something, like let's say I sell you a bag of potato chips, and you say I want my money back, and it's now half a bag of potato chips, I'll give you half your money back. You understand? Like when it comes to RMAing, it's important that the product is returned in the way that it was sold, and that includes putting everything back on it as it was the way you took it out of the box. Otherwise, you're rolling the dice because the manufacturer may say, hey, that's no big deal. Or the manufacturer may say, sending it back unrepaired. If you want to, send it back again, pay for shipping again and delay, continue the delay and getting it fixed, then you can put it back the way it was and we'll take it back. Just if you do it all the right way the first time, then you don't give them that option. But if you take a chance, you're too lazy and you can't be bothered, then you open up the opportunity for the possibility of the manufacturer to decline the RMA because the board was not returned in the condition in which it was sold. Something to keep in mind. That's universal across all manufacturers, across all product categories. Farrell Sparky's contributed $2. Said was busy watching your last video. Fair enough. Susan Harris with a $5 contribution says, I'm so glad to be a part of your community. You've helped me stay sane through this COVID-19 pandemic. Well, I'm glad you can join us, and I'm glad you're a part of the community, Susan. It's always good to see you here in the chat room. South Bay Technology Gurus has contributed $4.99 and says, what thermal paste do you use? I'll use whatever I can get, but the Noctua NTH1 is a pretty good price on Amazon. It's about $8, I think, and you get a pretty big tube. Arctic Silver 5 is fine, just, whatever cheap. The thermal paste, it really doesn't matter. Honestly, it doesn't matter. You need to use it, but you don't need to buy the real expensive stuff. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. So I think I have a whole video on that. I think there's a quick tips about thermal paste and the obsession people have with it. But the practicality and the realistic part of the thermal compound is that the difference between them is no more than 1 to 3 degrees centigrade Celsius. That's it. And if that matters to you, I'm not the kind of person you need to talk to. I don't have a PhD, so. Alex says the only thing different in my build was I used an i7 9700F. Because I couldn't find a 9700K. And I was wondering why my system would not post. Yeah, well, the F doesn't have a built-in graphics chip, so you'd have to provide your own graphics card. And Rick Lakes has contributed $5. Hey, Rick, thank you for that. Let's prep the new board. So here we've got, this is again a returned motherboard. We don't know that it works, but we have to assume that some modicum, very, very minimal amount of testing was done by some Amazon associate to determine that the board at least posts. So knowing that it's a modern board, it's not years and years old, knowing it's coming from a reputable manufacturer, that it's still under warranty, and if we want to, if the board is bad, we could RMA it as though we were the original purchaser They don't need to know that it was bought as a used product. They being the manufacturer, they don't need to know that. As long as you have a receipt, you can prove, the purchase date, the manufacturer will honor the warranty. Now, the other thing that's important is to keep the I/O shield with the motherboard. So we're going to pop that I/O shield out, and we're going to keep that together with that motherboard. And we've got the new I/O shield in the motherboard box, which I will get to in a moment. But first, I guess I need to turn this more this way, don't I? Let's prep this board by getting the M.2 drive installed first and foremost and get it out of the way. We'll see if I can't get you a little more of a close-up on this. So underneath the heatsink right here is where our M.2 drive is going to go. That's super easy to get installed. I am skeptical about the report of bad RAM, only because I just don't trust anything that motherboard says. Somebody who used this has already taken the tape off of it. This doesn't have to be super clean. It's thermal tape. The cleaner it is, the better it transfers, but it's only for an M.2 drive, which really doesn't cool it by more than about 10 degrees Celsius anyway. So it's not going to be a big deal if it's not perfectly clean. Leave it on there, still use it, it's fine. We'll put the ADATA drive in. I keep calling it ADATA. The add link drive is going to pop right in like so. And then we should be able to put this right back on top. There's a little slot above the M.2 drive. And the one screw that secures this lid also secures the drive below it. So we're only dealing with one screw in this design. I've seen other manufacturers where you've got one screw for the lid and another screw for the M.2 drive below it, which I think is stupid. So this makes more sense to me. I approve this design. I need to make sure that the drive is lined up properly. It looks like it's shifted a little bit. There it is. Okay. Now I can see the mounting hole, and that should just go right down in there. And you don't over tighten this, you just pretty much make it snug. That's not going anywhere, job done. We can lift up this lever and put the CPU in. When we're putting the CPU in, it only goes in one direction. And I don't even have to look for the little golden triangle. I can just sort of grab it by the edges until it falls into place, rotating it 90 degrees each time with zero downward pressure. I'm not pushing down on it. I'm just rotating it around, very lightly setting it on top and kind of moving it about just to see if the pins will line up with the holes with no downward pressure. And then we can lock it in place. Now, we still have those little plastic brackets I was talking about that have to be removed for us to put the stock cooler on it. So we're going to take these off right now. Now, these may or may not be branded, so it may be possible for you to just take these brackets off and move them to your other board that you're returning, though I don't advise you to do that because the manufacturer knows what their brackets look like, and if you've modified them, they may use that as an excuse to deny your warranty. So even though they may do the same job and may visually appear the same to the untrained eye, there may be differences that the manufacturer may use to identify that it's not their product and that what you've done has voided the warranty. Be aware that some manufacturers do pull stunts like that. Now, when I'm putting the heatsink on, I'm looking to see where the CPU power fan connector is. You see I've got a fan connector here that's got a slightly bent pin. That's fixed. Where is my CPU fan power? Something about LEDs, obviously RAM, USB 3, front board headers here, main power, CPU power. Oh, right next to the CPU power, right there, is the CPU fan header. So I want this heatsink to go on, so this cable is going to go right to that header without having to run it around the fan. In fact, I can plug it in first, just for the sake of doing it, then put the CPU fan on top, and then I want to use a regular screwdriver. I don't want to use my mechanical driver, and we want to just give each one of these screws a couple of turns just to get them started. Don't take them too far, or it's going to be very difficult to start the ones you've not yet turned. And now we can go ahead and tighten them down. Always do opposite corners. And then always double check your work. Go back around one more time. These screws do come to a dead stop, so you can't over tighten them. They just simply reach a point where they just freeze and they can't go any further. And I always feel very reassured when I encounter that. You can see the cable management is going to be a little different. The cable length is, I mean, I could leave it that way, but I don't like it. I think I could further reduce the way that cable, the amount of space that cable is consuming by using another zip tie. So I'm going to grab my zip ties and take care of that now before I put the motherboard in the case. Once that motherboard's in the case, it's going to be very difficult to try and do any sort of cable management for the CPU fan, unless you're working on a case where the lid comes off. Some of them do. Either way, it's still easier to do it this way. I think I'm going to try doing this. You'll see I've unplugged it because it's easier for me to manipulate the cable. Once I have a general idea of how much cable I need, then I can kind of guesstimate by unplugging it and have better control of that cable. It just requires less effort than to fold it up the way that's going to, look the best when I do before I put the zip ties on. I'm not looking for perfection. I just want it to be better than it was. And I think that's better than it was. Okay. The last thing we have to put on is the RAM, which is super easy. Only one side on these retention levers opens. This side doesn't open because it would interfere with hitting the graphics card potentially. Some motherboards, this side does open. Some motherboards, this side doesn't. So if you're working on a board and these aren't moving, that's because they're not supposed to move. Don't force them. You will break them if you force them. Now, according to my friend, one of these sticks of Evo, there it is, Evo Spear RAM. He says one of these sticks is registering as bad. RAM usually has about a lifetime warranty on it. I'm not believing that the RAM is bad, so I'm going to go with it. and then we'll see what happens. The problem is when you're diagnosing a, let's say in this case, a bad motherboard, how can you trust whatever the diagnostics say? You'd need another motherboard that you know works, that you can take the RAM out and test it in. And unfortunately, my friend's, all these systems he has are all DDR3, so he doesn't have another board he can test it with. So I'm going to assume that it's okay, but if it's not, it's super easy to swap the RAM out. Now I got to put the IO shield in. So in the box, here's our IO shield. What else do we have? We have SATA cables, we've got an antenna, we've got a weird plug thing. What is this? I don't know what this is. Anybody know what that is? You got me. Look, we even have the Go Faster sticker. So for something used, it doesn't look like it was used very much. I'd say that antenna was never ever taken out of the bag. These SATA cables were never taken out of the bag. And then there's a couple of screws up here and a standoff, but for what? Is that just something Amazon does to all motherboards now because it's a common part that's missing? Or is there another space on this board for an M.2 drive? I suspect Amazon is including the standoff and screw in general for all motherboards because it's a frequent part that's missing, because there's no other place to put standoffs and screws. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm assuming. Here's our new IO shield, and you'll see it's got the foam that's padded, and I much prefer that to the metal. How did the MSI standoff compare? Yeah, see, MSI standoff is inferior. You see how it's got these little metal, I don't know where to put this. See this tab? That'll oftentimes get bent down, and then it'll block access to that port. You won't be able to plug into it. You'll be like, oh, I can't get my plug in. And that requires you to have to remove the whole motherboard because you weren't paying attention when you put your IO shield in, or when you put your motherboard in, to make sure that these little metal grounding straps didn't fold forward and block access to the ports. So that MSI is crap. This is how it should be done. And if you want to call me a Gigabyte fanboy, I don't care. Because if MSI did it this way and Gigabyte did it this way, then I guess I'd be an MSI fanboy, huh? See how that works? So the IO shield, let's go back over here now. Put that in with the audio ports facing down. Remember, this is just a friction fit, no tools are needed. You just align it. This is a part that many first-time builders will struggle with. That's normal. Don't expect your first time to do it to go as gracefully as the way I do it. And then people will probably laugh going, oh, you think you do it gracefully? Just allow yourself the opportunity to have an experience that is required for you to understand it. I don't know any other way to phrase it. But sometimes somebody can make something difficult look really, really simple. And eventually, through practice, you can also make it look simple. But I think it's unrealistic to assume that you're going to follow along in a process for the very first time and have the entire thing be simple, or as simple as it appears. That's where experience pays off. I'm going to lay the board flat. I'm going to lay the case flat. And let's grab the motherboard and figure out how we're going to cable this up. Because some of these cables might be easier to put on before I secure the board. So I'm going to kind of stand in the way of the camera here so I can align this. We want to align these front IO ports with the holes in the IO shield, first and foremost. And because we had previously cabled this, we're going to have a lot of cables potentially in our way. And we don't want to get any of those cables trapped under the board. The board won't seat right. You'll be struggling with it. I can already see one trapped under there now. That's the front port switches. And unlike other like ATX builds, there's nothing to hold the board in place. Like there's no center post. As a result, sorry, my microphone fell. As a result, the board just kind of sits very loosely in the case. And I think with this case, I can reach my hands in there and get all the cables. So I'm going to go ahead and lock it down. I might regret it later, but let's just do it. Because the sooner I can get this board, I keep calling it a board, the sooner I can get this case back on its feet, the sooner you'll see what I'm doing. Wow, that wiggles a lot. All right, so the good news is it lined up perfectly and all the screws went in without a problem. And so that's what the new board is going to look like, or it currently looks like, without the cables attached. I need to get the light far enough away that you can get an idea there. And so all I'm going to do right now is reattach the cables that were previously attached, the 24-pin motherboard connector. It's super easy to put on. It's a very unique looking connector. No other connector looks like that. It only goes in one place, and it only goes on one way with the clip facing the edge of the board. Looking down in this bottom corner, and this light is just a little too bright, so it's probably just as bad as having no light. But this is our front audio connector. And that is going to go in a very tight spot right down here, it looks like. Now, what's interesting to me is on the MSI board right here, the location of our power switch and reset switch was in a very unusual position. Normally on mini ITX boards, I'm accustomed to the front power switch and reset switch being somewhere near the large motherboard power connector. So I would have assumed during the build that this was it, right up here, but that's USB, clearly says USB, but it looks the same. There's a pin missing from the top right corner. And on this board, this is our audio connector right down here. And then above it, you'll see it looks just like the USB connector. There's a pin missing on the end, but that's where the power switch and reset switch go. But on our new board, our power switch and reset switch are over here where I expect it. So we're going to reroute those cables. Another weird design choice from MSI, and it's another reason why I would stay away from their motherboards, because when they start doing things different than what the industry has sort of agreed on, whether or not it's official or not, the industry as a whole decides, we're all going to put our connectors in this location. And they just do it without a written rule. They just do it that way. And then every once in a while, a manufacturer will change things up a bit. Like I complain when Gigabyte adds that extra mounting hole that I can't find a case that supports it. And in this case, I've not worked on enough mini ITX motherboards to tell you that that's normal to move those connectors over into this corner. But I will say, from the experience I do have, that's the first I've ever seen it that I can recall. I just want to move this cable through this hole. I think this is a better mounting point here, or routing point rather, for the audio cable. And I apologize that your view is probably not very good. It is getting dark here, and it's a black case, and it's a black motherboard, and it's a black cable, and I'm standing right in front of it with a flashlight, and the I/O connectors are even above it and blocking my view. So what I'm going to have to do is I've got a cable tie. I think it's going to have to get moved. Well, we also have USB 3.1. This board doesn't support that, does it? Well, it should be cool if it did. No, it doesn't have it. Oh well. USB 3.0 header is in the same place. It's down here on the bottom, right there. Except it's turned the other direction for some reason. Now above that, what is that? Is another USB connector, USB 2. And this connector, it has multiple colors on it. That's our reset switch, power switch. That's usually how you can tell. Again, not a written rule, but a rule generally manufacturers follow, which is to label that specific connector with different colors. Red for the hard drive LED, for example. Let me see what the color layout is, because it's always the same. It's blue for the hard drive LED, green for the power LED. It's like a lighter blue for the reset switch, and red is the power switch. So red is the power switch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this, very carefully cut this cable tie, because I don't want to cut the cable. I always lay the cutters flat so I don't get into the cable. And I will redo the cable management, because, all of one cable tie, that's really going to be difficult, right? And this case only supports the reset switch and power switch. There's no power LED, and there's no hard drive LED on this case, which I was kind of sad about. So let's see, this is the power switch. That's going to go on the red set of wires or pins. And then the reset switch is going to go directly below that. Where is it? Where did it go? Really a tight spot between the installed RAM Yeah, we'll clean that up a little bit later. Finally, I just have that 8-pin CPU power connector to hook up, which is going to go, sorry, that's the graphics connector, the 8-pin CPU power. Again, this is going to be something impossible for me to film for you guys, and it's very, very difficult for me to even see it. So I'm going to lay the case flat in the hopes that it might be a little easier for me. But it's a tight fit, and it's in a corner. If I had 3 hands, it would be really useful right now. What's getting in the way is this rear fan, so I think I'm going to quickly remove this rear fan. It's just too large, and this is pretty common, a common practice on a mini ITX case. A lot of times these fans interfere because they're so big, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the case. Now I should be able to get in there pretty easily. I have full view and access of it. And as you can tell, I'm still struggling a little bit because it's two connectors instead of one connector. It's two that connect together, and they sort of have to go on together. I think I've got it now. Yeah, that feels pretty good. Yeah. Now I can put the fan back on. Pull this up a little bit. Put it right about there. And then we can put the graphics card back in. And once again, I'm going to just keep this laying flat. I realize there's not a whole lot for you to see, and I apologize. But if you're going to do this yourself, you should be doing it with the case laying flat, not the way that I demonstrate on video. And the only reason I do it that way is so people can watch, so people have a view of what I'm doing. And then I'm going to secure the card in place. Oh, I guess I can just lower that. Secure the card. And we can secure this back plate. Now, after we apply power to the graphics card, which is right here, same power connector, obviously, the same graphics card, we've effectively just changed out the motherboard. That's the whole process. Every cable, RAM, CPU, etc., etc. We can fire it up and see if it works. So let me just clear my work area a little bit so I don't knock things off onto the floor, which I'm really good at. So to test, we need a keyboard and mouse, which I have here, of course, as always. And we'll just find a USB port to plug that into. It doesn't matter which one. Let me grab a HDMI cable, and we can run the video out to your monitor at home. So these are the Twisted Veins branded cable Amazon sells. This is a 15-footer, and I will break these cables. They're not really intended to be plugged and unplugged constantly, so they last me about 6 months, and I have to change them. But I like how well they're made. I like the sleeving that's done on them. They're pretty strong cables. Okay. Finally, I need a power cable. And I think I'll just plug it in right over here. And I'm going to put this up here for now. Why is that box so heavy? What did my friend send me? What is in here? Oh, he sent everything back. No, he wasn't fooling around. Okay. Okay. Next time, Ron, you're supposed to keep this box. Because, like I said, sending something back for warranty does not require the original box. And you've got your power cable is in there, your spare connectors, modular power cables for the power supply are in there, documentation for the SSD, all that stuff is in there. You should have kept that. You didn't need to pay to ship that. I didn't need to pay for you to ship that back to me because I have to turn around and ship it again back to you. All right, I see what you did. Better safe than sorry. I gotcha. Let's take a quick look in chat, see what I've missed. Rick Lakes contributed $5. Michael Dane contributed $5. He says the late night show with Carrie Holzman. And now here's Carrie. David Starbuck contributes again, $20. He says, as to the MSI question, I put together 3 new systems so far this year with MSI motherboards, 2 AMD and 1 Intel, which was a 10700. And they are chooching. They are chooching right along with no issues. Richard Angeline's contributed $5. He says a late night stream is better than late night TV on the East Coast. Well, thanks for joining me. Thank you. I'll take that compliment. I'll take any compliments. Carrie, explain in 2 minutes what a GPU is. Yeah. It's a graphics card. Done. All right, so let's fire this thing up. Let's see if it's going to work. I'm curious. I'm anxious. I'm excited. And I've plugged into the wrong, anybody catch that? Should not be plugging into the onboard graphics. We need to plug into the discrete graphics. And that's why there's this little plug. This actually has, this motherboard has 2 HDMI and a display port built into it. That's pretty amazing. I wonder if all 3 will work at the same time. So I'm going to get more plugs and plug those up so that Ron doesn't do what I just did. I'm going to flip over to your monitor at home. We're going to go to what I call camera 2. In order to do that, I have to grab the right mouse. It's kind of finicky that way. Where's camera 2? There it is. And then I will take camera 1 and we'll grab a corner of that picture and move me off to the side. That ought to be good. And power button. We have a problem. Right now I can see the 2 fans aren't spinning. I didn't hook up the fan connector. But I'm going to let that slide for right now, just to see if I get a post. It's taking a long time. It's taking a very long time. I'm not feeling good about this at all. I know when I buy used parts, I'm going to be taking a bit of a risk. But I also know that with Amazon's customer service, it's easy to return stuff if I have to. And I also have the RMA process through the motherboard manufacturer, which I can consider as well. But right now, I'd say it's been on long enough. We should have seen something, and we're not seeing anything at all. So I'm going to go back to just double check my work, and I'm going to hook these 2 case fans up just because. So there's no on-off switch on the small form factor power supply. So I want to recheck that the video card's seated right, that my power cables are seated right. I don't want to jump to any assumption that anything is bad other than my work, right? So that's the first thing to check, is the quality of your work. Make sure everything is seated fully, that you haven't missed a set of pins somehow, some way. Inspect it as well as you can, including the back of the power supply. Sometimes in shipping, things can come loose. You'd be surprised. You're like, how is that possible? I don't know. That's why you're surprised. These connectors look pretty good. The front CPU fans, that's the fan header I've got here. And this motherboard's single fan header's way down at the opposite end compared to MSI. So what I did is I plugged both of the fans on the case together into a splitter, because there's only one fan header on the MSI motherboard, and there appears to be only one fan header on this Gigabyte board as well. Let's see what happened here. Is that gonna be enough slack to get to where I need to get to? I don't think it's going to be long enough. It's very close. The problem I'm having is this cable right here going to the rear fan. It's just a little too short, but maybe I've pulled enough slack. Let me move this USB 3 cable out of the way, because it's blocking access to the fan plug, which is right here. Yeah, that's a real funky fitting, the way that they've got this routed, or positioned rather. It makes me have to route the cable in a weird way. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Plug this on first. That is incredibly difficult to get to. You see, in doing so, I have pulled both of the power connector, or power switch and reset switch, right off their connectors in doing that. So let me put those back where they were. All right. And then when we come around here, you'll see that in doing this, it put too much stress on the cable and disconnected the rear case fan. And you can see it's a very tight fit. I mean, it'll make it, but just, and that's going to separate very easily. But for the sake of testing, I just want to ensure that everything's seated correctly. We're going to try it one more time, and then we're going to trade the RAM out in case we do have a bad RAM module, which could be preventing us from booting. And I'm okay with that. At least it's verifying something's wrong. We're going to try one more time. There we go, power back on. Okay, fans are turning this time. Front fan's turning, rear fan is turning, CPU fan is turning. Everything looks good here as far as I can tell. So because we're still not getting a post screen, once again, I'm going to unplug power. I don't want to work on a system with it plugged in regardless of the state of the power switch. It's a very unwise thing to do. And I'm going to pull both these RAM modules out and replace them with the G.Skill Ripjaws RAM I've got over here. We'll find out what's going on one way or another. All right, let's try it again. New RAM, power. Let's see what happens. So if the board continues to not post, the other thing we can check are the BIOS settings. We can reset the BIOS by moving a jumper on the board just to ensure that, I haven't even checked it. So it's quite possible that the jumper was moved to the clear position, which would more than likely emulate the exact same symptom over the location of a simple jumper. I'm seeing that the RAM doesn't seem to be the issue here at all, and we're still not getting a post. So the recommendation to pull the graphics card is there. I don't know that the CPU we used has a graphics card built into it. Sometimes you're going to run into a system or a customer that just seemingly has bad luck, right? But superstition doesn't really play well with technology. It very rarely works out to be the case, to be something as simple as bad luck. It is going to always be logical and simply unfortunate that it should happen to, one person more than once. Just realized I put that connector in the wrong place. That one goes there, that one goes there. That's better. Oh, it was right, it just was on an angle. Okay, so on the BIOS, where's my BIOS reset here? Should be somewhere on this board. Gonna have to pull the manual out on this one because I don't know where it is. I didn't really change anything, but I'm gonna turn it on just for the sake of turning it on. Yeah, it's not posting. Nothing's happening. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Let's go back to full screen on camera one. And I'll turn off camera two here for a minute. Oh, I didn't even plug the HDMI cable in. I want to just try something here. Let's go here, just out of curiosity. And let's see what happens if I cycle power. Give me just a second here. Let me unplug power, wait for the fans to stop spinning, plug power back in, and let the unit power itself back on, and see if it's going to do anything. Because this no signal that you're seeing on your screen is essentially just that. It's saying that there's no video signal. It should say no video signal. That would be clearer to, I can't tell you the number of times I've got calls from customers going, no signal. So yeah, that's just not going to play. So all right, let me unplug this. It's fine. It's fine. And then let's go back to camera one. We're good. Now, we've changed the RAM. Yeah, we didn't see any difference. I'm trying to remember what CPU we used on this build. I know it's in the video notes. Let's see. What did we use? Some people are suggesting a BIOS update. It seems unlikely, but it's possible. Um, There's that damn spider again. Well, he's getting around tonight. Why does he think he can just roam around my house? Where is he? Come on out. Come on out, buddy. Come on. Those spiders are allowed. Check 1 2, check 1 2. Let's see if that works any better now. Check 1 2, check 1 2. Okay, so hopefully we're still okay, and we should be okay now with audio. All right, so I think what I'm going to do is work on this outside of the case. When we reach a situation like this, it no longer makes sense to try to work within the confines of the computer case because of the limitations, the visibility, access, and things like that um, are much more difficult. So when you're doing something simple and straightforward, it's no big deal to swap some RAM out or change an M.2 drive. But when you get into some more serious diagnostics, things that require a bit more focus and concentration, it helps to have full access all the way around the board, see what's going on, make sure that nothing's shorting out or anything that you wouldn't see otherwise in the system, in the case. And yeah, let's see what happens here if we take this out. I'm gonna think about how I want to do this. Yeah, we're just gonna pull it out. And it's super easy. Once again, we're just gonna pull power from the graphics card, and let me grab my power driver and we'll get that graphics card out of here. But once again, taking it apart is super fast. Not a whole lot to the removal. And this becomes one of those things that, you can either get into a habit of doing all your repairs this way, but I think you'll find, as I have, that most repairs are pretty straightforward and that taking these extra steps are just that. They're extra and unnecessary and add up to more time required. So I do it as needed, basically. I assume I don't need to do it, and then when I have to take a board out to work on it on a workbench, then it's because I've exhausted the reasonable efforts that are required from working within the case, or where the board is still in the case. So again, it only takes a moment to disconnect everything. Now I do have an older Ryzen processor that I could put in this board, but I don't believe the B450 boards needed a BIOS update to work with, and I could be wrong, but I don't think they required it to work with this series of chips that we've got in there. It's a, what is it, a 3600 or 3600X? I can't remember. It's in the video notes. I'm sure Ron will shout it out in chat because I can't remember which one we used. I think we used a 3600X. And then what I'll do is I'll place the board on top. Wow, it's taking the IO shield with it. Oh, because I got that plug in. That's what it's doing. Yeah, you got to make sure you've unplugged everything from the back of the board, or you may find it's a little difficult to get the board to come out. I'm getting hung up on power connector to the fan. Let's get rid of that. There we go. All right. So with our board completely out of the case, we have a lot more access to see what is going on. And we're going to just put the case out of the way here. We'll just move it over here. You can see how running out of room happens rather quickly in my world. Put the case there so we can work on the motherboard over here. Then I'm going to grab a spare power supply so I can plug in from a different power source just to verify we're not having some kind of weird power supply issue, which, you know, it happens. Do I have an opened power supply? Yes, I do. Oh, there goes some tools. So even though the power supply that the case utilizes is really small, it's still delivering the same power and the same connectors as your standard size power supply. You just don't get as many of them. Where's the other connector? CPU. It's going to go right up here. That's that one I struggled to show you guys. That one way up there in the corner. And then we need some way to trigger the system on and off, so I'm going to grab just a spare power switch I've got lying about. Whenever I'm getting rid of an old computer case, I'll often strip it of the LEDs and switches because I can use those for projects or testing. Like this is an old reset switch from an old case. And the reset switch will function as a power switch and vice versa. They're the same switch. They just, when you press them, depending on where you've plugged it in, either resets the system or turns the system on. Now, I don't think that this graphics card, or I'm sorry, I don't think that this GPU has a built-in graphics card. I want to say it doesn't. I can't remember. It isn't going to hurt anything for me to plug something into it and see. And then we can grab power and plug it in. And then we can plug a keyboard and mouse into it as well. And it's just that quick and easy to get it. You know, how many minutes did that take? You know, it's not the big deal sometimes people make it out to be. So I flipped it on here. We've got the fan spinning. It's powered up. There's power going through it, so you don't want to obviously touch it and cause yourself any sort of shock. Let's see if we get any video out of it. I don't think the CPU has onboard graphics. I was sort of hoping I'd hear back from Ron in the chat room on that. And I'm going to just let it stay here for a minute on this screen. Ron says it's a 3600X. Okay, that's what I thought. Does the 3600X have built-in graphics? I don't think it does. Yeah, there's no integrated graphics on a 3600X, so we're not going to get anywhere with this. So I'm going to go ahead and just, at least now I've got a switch on the power supply I can use and cut the power that way. And I'm going to put the graphics card back in it. Then we're going to move that over to the graphics card, and then we have to give the graphics card some power. We can flip the switch back on, and one more time with power, and flip us back over to camera 2. I don't expect any different behavior. I suspect it's still going to give us the no signal, but I'll give it a moment. Just to power it exactly the same as it was, with the only difference is that it's outside of the case. Now, normally I don't think Amazon would just accept a returned product and not test it and offer it for sale again, but they might. I wouldn't put it past them. But there's usually a reason somebody returns something. And at least with computer stuff, It seems a lot of times those returns happen because people don't know what they're doing and they've made a mistake. It is possible we have a bad board. It's entirely possible. BIOS update is also possible, though it seems unlikely. So clearly we're not getting anywhere with this. We're exactly where we were. And that's, again, just a simple diagnostic check before we go too far. I don't want to go any further than I need to, right? So I verified the problem continues to exist. Our CPU fan does turn and the power switch does work. The motherboard acknowledges when the power is hit and it does attempt to boot. We've swapped the RAM out and we have the exact same symptom. Now on this motherboard, there should be a jumper somewhere with regards to resetting the BIOS. They just don't know where it is. And it's so because it's a mini ITX board, everything is so jammed together. It's so everything's been made really small. So you've got to pay real close attention because they just jammed everything so close together. You don't have as much room. And this is certainly not a good first build for somebody to do a mini ITX build. It's going to be a challenge. Okay, I see the battery for the BIOS is right here, and it's taped up against the I/O for the Ethernet and USB. And where does it go? Usually wherever the battery goes is close to where the jumper is to reset the BIOS. I think I see it. I think it's right down here by the audio input, if I'm not mistaken. I think that might be it. I don't see any writing on the board. I rely a lot on the etchings on the board, so I don't have to go to the instruction manual. But in this case, I got to go to the instruction manual. So let's go back full screen on camera 1, since there's nothing to see on camera 2. Let's see what the documentation says for BIOS reset, or CMOS reset. Okay, it shows $17. Yep, it is exactly where I thought it was. No, it isn't. That was 16. 17's on the other side, just above. Okay, I see it. So for this, I need to grab a jumper. They don't give you one. It's just 2 pins that are sticking out of the board, and if you short them together, that clears the CMOS or the BIOS. And I mean, if you were just Joe user, you wouldn't have a jumper laying around. But you could use a screwdriver or some other piece of metal to short out or to touch those 2 connectors together. Using a jumper is a little more convenient because I can leave it there, let it stay on there for a moment. If I can find a jumper, I know I've got them. Here's one. This will work. This is what we call a jumper. I'm going to see if I can give you a close-up of it here. That little doohickey right there, and you'll see we're going to just put that over the 2 pins. It connects the 2 pins together, shorts them together. That's going to go way down here. Right there. I don't know how well you can pick that up, but that shorts out the BIOS. There's a set of 2 pins just above it, which is what I thought was the clear option because of the battery plugging in over here. I thought it'd be close to the battery. It is relatively close to the battery. And then we're going to let that sit. It does say in the manual Use this jumper to clear the BIOS config and reset CMOS values to factory defaults. To clear the CMOS values, use a metal object like a screwdriver to touch the pins for a few seconds. So they're not real specific about how long you need to short it out. That's why I like using the jumper. I can just leave it on there for an extended period of time. Always turn off your computer and unplug the power cord from the power outlet before clearing the CMOS values. All right. After system restart, go to the BIOS setup to load factory defaults or manually configure your BIOS. Okay, we're going to try one more time. I feel like that should be long enough. System will not boot with the jumper on here. So we'll take that back off and plug the power supply back in. I have to plug a video card in this. I don't have a choice. I wish I had a graphics card that didn't require power. It would be a little easier for me to get in and out of there. It's one of the unfortunate parts of picking a CPU that doesn't have built-in graphics is if you have a problem, diagnosing it is a little more challenging. Not everything in life is easy. Or convenient. Okay, that looks good. I don't honestly think it's going to make a difference, but we're going to try it anyway. We'll flip the switch back on. We'll go back over to camera 2. Here we go. Turn it back on. Fans are spinning. I'm going to just put myself in a corner here. Now, in this case, I will give it about 60 to 90 seconds for the BIOS to reset, to re-recognize the CPU and the RAM that are installed. Yeah, we should have seen something by now. Wayne Lawrence is suggesting that the motherboard may have an older BIOS. He says that it requires version F40 on the BIOS. And I could try a 2000 series CPU on there. It certainly couldn't hurt. I mean, I've got a brand new older Ryzen chip in a box. I don't know what it is. I've had it for so long. It's just been sitting back here untouched. And, you know, it was always going to be one of those projects one of these days. And days have turned into weeks, weeks have turned into months, and months have turned into well over a year. And I don't know what it is. I don't even remember what chip I bought. We're about to find out. I know it's old. It's a Ryzen 5 1500X. What do you think of that? How's that? Let me just wipe the dust off of the box. That's terrible. There we go, just like new. Okay. 1500X. Ryzen 5. Brand new in a box. Never used. What do you think? Think that ought to work? The AMD drama is real. Yeah, that should be a first generation chip. So let's try it, see what happens. It's not like it's gaining any value sitting on my shelf. It's not really doing anything to benefit me. So it's not like I'm devaluing it by opening up the box. I wonder what I paid for this. There it is. If my camera will focus on it. There it goes. Well, I'll tell you what we know so far. By switching out the RAM and by changing out the power supply and having the exact same symptoms, it's fair to say we don't have a power supply or a RAM issue at this point. We're focused now on, could be M.2, could be CPU, could be BIOS, but we can pretty much take RAM and power supply off of our suspect list. So to change out the CPU, just takes a moment. It's very loud. Set that over there. Yeah, my switch is off. I should have checked that. I'm usually really good about the benefit of OCD, as I'm usually really good about making sure things are off immediately. But then I start thinking about it because it is OCD, right? And you think, oh, did I do that? And then it'll bother me until I look. You think I'd know myself well enough by now? All right, let's try this out and see if this is going to be any happier. Once again, I'm not going to do anything with regards to thermal compound. I'm just going to put the same heatsink right back on. And because this is a test I don't really care much about, I'm going to use the the electric driver to tighten it down a bit. Well, to tighten it down all the way, actually, which I would never normally do. But we've passed normal. That's it. So the heat sink's down, it's plugged in, the CPU's been swapped out. We'll grab the video card here. And this would be a valid reason why somebody might return a product. They might have bought a CPU that wasn't compatible with the board, said, hey, this thing doesn't work, I want my money back. And Amazon took it back. See, we don't know. It could have been a computer genius that tried everything and it's actually a bad board. We just don't know. It is a form of entertainment for me to, when the time is right and I'm not feeling stressed out and pressured, this is playing. This is my idea of having a good time. I know, right? What a nerd. I enjoy the diagnostic process when I don't have a customer tapping their foot and looking at their watch. That kind of takes the fun out of it. Okay, everything's plugged back in. Switch is back on. Let's go back over to camera 2. All right, and let's see what happens. Power's on, fans are spinning. Ooh, sounds a little different this time. Sped up, the fans sped up, and then they slowed down. It's never done that before. Or I didn't hear it. It does sound like the fans are kind of, well, yeah, look at this. We got somewhere. Come on, when is TV better than this? Let's see if I can make myself a little smaller. So this is the previous version of Windows 10 that was installed on the MSI board that was locking up. and it's going to reinstall video drivers, etc., as it needs to display. So that's as far as I really need to take it. At this point now, it does appear to be a BIOS-related issue. So folks in the chat room were dead on with that recommendation, it appears. We're going to find out what BIOS version it has here in just a minute. What is it? Let's just hit delete. No, it's not. Let me do that. I'm hitting the wrong keyboard. I got to use the right keyboard. All right, that looks good to me. We're going to shut it down. And we'll turn it back on, and this time we're going to go into the BIOS and see what BIOS version we've got. So if I just continually hit delete while I'm powering up, oh, come on now. Why you got to be like that? Shut it off. Turn it back on. All right, back to delete, delete, delete. I had the power switch off on my wireless keyboard, so none of the buttons I was pressing were going through. Let me try it again with the switch on the keyboard turned on. And I'll hit delete, delete, delete. I bet I get into the BIOS. Hey, look at this. And what version do we have? F5. F5. Did you say F40 was needed and we're on F5? That must be, what? Seriously? Really? What? Okay. So at this point, what I need to do is go to, well, I'm going to go to Google, and I'm simply going to type in the Google search B450i AORUS Pro Wi-Fi. And the first link that Google will offer me will take me right to Gigabyte's homepage where this motherboard is promoted, right? They've got all the information on it. And just, not at the top of the page, but down by the motherboard, it says support. Right across the title, it says key features, specifications, support, news and awards, and buy. That's the support button I want to hit. And then I want to scroll down. I don't have to worry about the OS. You just scroll down, and there are 13 BIOSes listed. The latest one is F51E as of July 2nd, 2020. I have F5. So F5 is from January 25th, 2019. Now, since F5, it jumped from F5 to F30, then F31, 32, 40, 41, 42G, 50, 51D, and finally 51E is the latest. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like I can jump from the current BIOS to the latest. It looks like I have to follow the steps that says, if you're using the QFlash utility, make sure you have updated to BIOS F32 before F40. So apparently I need F32, and then I can do anything from F40 and beyond, because everything after F40 says follow the steps on F40. So that means I need F32. So if I scroll down to F32, well, that was the one previous to F40, and I don't see any other prerequisites, just F32. So normally, like on the Intel platform, you would just download and install the latest BIOS update. I should be able to show this to you. Let me try something here. Let's go full screen. Okay. And then let's delete this. And let's do a new window capture. And there you can see all the different BIOSes and where I'm looking on the Gigabyte page. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to download F32, put it on a flash drive. Then we're going to update to F32, and then I'm going to download the latest BIOS, and then we're going to do it again as required. So for that, let me switch that back off. So it's too confusing to me. I'm getting Windows and Windows. It's very puzzling. I'm glad I had that CPU laying around. It's turned out to be quite useful. Guess that I should keep it if for no other reason than for diagnostics. So while you guys can sit there and look at me, lucky you, I will hit the download button for F32, and I'm going to extract that zip file into a folder, and I'm going to copy the .f32 file, and only that file, onto this blank flash drive that I use for BIOS updates. I always use a small flash drive. This is a 2 gig flash drive. Pretty much anything under 16 gigs is preferred, and that's because we want it in the FAT32 file system, especially with older boards. Newer boards, it's not that important, but it's good to get into the habit because the old way always works on the new boards. The new way doesn't work on the old boards. So I'm going to just paste, copy and paste that single file to the flash drive, which is now completed. And then I can remove the flash drive and then take it over here and plug it into any USB port on the back of this machine. Now, if we go back to that machine's screen and we take a look at the QFlash options, whoops, that's not what I wanted. QFlash right down here, update BIOS. I don't know, it may not see the drive. I might have to reboot to see the USB flash drive. No, it found it right there. Press to start. And you'll see this is a really painless process. The hardest part of it really is patience, right? It's just not touching anything. Leave it alone. Don't play with the keyboard. Don't play with the mouse. Try to distract yourself as needed to leave it alone. It's going to completely update the BIOS and reboot itself without you touching anything. Daniel L. Laser contributed $3. Hey, Daniel, thank you for that. Richard Angeline contributes $2 and says, I'm still watching on the East Coast, and the time is 12:30 at night. David Starbuck contributes $20. He says, Carrie, I believe the B450 only supports the 2000 series of chips natively. Please try an older CPU if you can. You are correct, David. This BIOS was out of date and probably the reason for the return. David, our officer, has contributed $5 Canadian. He says this is for new batteries. And Ghost Shadow had contributed $2 to let me know there was no sound earlier. B-Jet Pilot contributed $9.99. So thanks you guys for your contributions and your support, as always. And we're just going to let this do whatever it needs to do. We've got 1,077 people watching this late at night. Nobody has a job. They're all working from home. Why are you up so late? All right, well, that's happening. I'm going to go ahead and download version F51E of the BIOS. I'm going to go ahead and download and extract that now. It gives me something to do. Just extract that one. And then I'm going to delete off my hard drive the previous download. I don't need that anymore. I've already used it, so we're done with that. Deleted. And where are we doing? How are we doing? We're getting there. We're 60% done. Cardboard Run Drum says it's 7 a.m. Well, I suppose, yeah, depending on where you're watching around the world, it could be the morning. But I would be asleep if it was 7 a.m. I am not a morning person, if you couldn't tell. Chevy Arthur says, my boss is me. Yeah, I got one of those bosses too. He's a jerk. Chef Jankowitz says, I want my 40-hour work week back. I haven't had a 40-hour work week in 15 years. Abdul Azim Patel has contributed $4.99. He says, I'm on my day off. I am an essential worker. Right on. It's kind of fun, I think, sometimes you can buy used product off of Amazon, especially like a motherboard. Because, as I mentioned, in many cases, the users don't know what they're doing. So this user, this customer who bought this board probably was putting in a modern Ryzen chip, and the BIOS doesn't support that, and they don't have the knowledge to know how to get the BIOS flashed for them, either through a friend. AMD will even send you a chip for flashing if you can prove to them that you don't have any other way to do it. And they take a credit card or something to hold the value of the CPU they're sending you in case you don't send it back. They'll happily charge you for it, but it's like a BIOS flash kit. But there's no reason you shouldn't be able to contact a local computer repair shop and have them do that for you, but probably people don't want to spend the money. I would imagine if you just dropped all this money for parts, you don't want to pay somebody to make the parts work. I get that too. So this no signal you're seeing on the screen right now, that should be, I wasn't paying attention, but that should be the BIOS automatically restarting. So we're going to let that sit here for a moment and see what happens. There it goes. Oh, it's already booting back into Windows again. I was watching the delayed feed, not the live. So I let that get by me. I'm going to close that back down. And then once this machine is off, I'm going to remove the flash drive, turn it back on, and press delete on the keyboard to get us back in the BIOS and ensure that we're on F32 now. Yeah, we are now on F32. So I'm going to take this flash drive and I'm going to delete the BIOS file off of it that I just used because we're done with it. We'll never ever use it again. So I'll delete that so the flash drive is once again blank. And I make the flash drive blank so that when I'm going to update the BIOS and the board looks at the flash drive, it doesn't offer me a bunch of options. It just has one file. You can't screw it up. You can't do it wrong. So now I'm going to put BIOS version 51E on that same flash drive, which, as I mentioned, I made blank, so that'll be the only file on the flash drive. And now I'm going to eject the flash drive, as you can see. And now I'm going to plug the flash drive again into any USB port in the back of the machine. So if I understood correctly, in order to do F40 and above, you need to have F32 first. That's the way I interpreted that. What will happen if I'm wrong is it'll say the BIOS is invalid. It won't allow it. And that means that you need a previous BIOS or you've got the wrong BIOS for the wrong motherboard. One of those two reasons is why that occurs. Or the file you downloaded was corrupted, but that's more likely on dial-up connections than broadband. That was more common back in the day. So back in the BIOS, we'll do the same process once more. If we go down here, go to QFlash, update BIOS, drop down here, we should see the flash drive, I hope. We should now have 51E. You'll see the file extension .51E. Double click on that. Press to start. And there we go. Deja vu, anybody? Enrique says, I'll bet you will check the BIOS version next time. Ha ha ha. Well, how do you check the BIOS version, Enrique? If the system doesn't boot because the BIOS isn't compatible with the processor, how exactly do you know what version of BIOS you know that you can check? How do you check it? Tell me how. So when you run into boards that don't boot, especially AMD boards, I think it's fairly common knowledge that a BIOS update is needed on older boards. And because I don't know how old this board is and I don't know why it was returned, I have no concept of what BIOS was on this. That being said, I will always try the easier things first. RAM is easy. Taking the board out, changing the power supply is all easy. Getting another CPU and replacing it, not so easy. However, because I did have a CPU in stock that was older, that was meant for a project that never happened, I was able to take care of that on my own. But it certainly is never going to be my first go-to step. And I wouldn't advise you to immediately jump into assumption simply because of a single example you watched on YouTube. I've seen boards that don't post for any number of reasons. It could be a bad connector, a cold solder joint, a bad processor, bad RAM, RAM that's not seated properly, a CPU that's not seated properly, a motherboard that's grounding out against something on the back of the system, a USB plug or a flash drive is causing it. I can go on and on and on and on and on. And you will give yourself a false sense of confidence if you just receive the information of how to fix a particular problem. And so that becomes the first thing you try to fix the similar problem from that day forward. You're going to be working very, very hard. If every time I got a system that didn't post, I swapped a CPU, I'd probably be swapping CPUs 9 times more than what is needed. So I have learned a certain diagnostic process, right? I've learned through my experience, 29 years of experience. To say, I bet you'll do that first next time means you don't really comprehend I've got 29 years of experience. My diagnostic process won't change. You always want to check the simple things first. Always check the easiest things. I promise you, you will save so much time, so much time. And then you work your way towards the more difficult things. If you start with the more difficult things, you're going to feel like a fool for wasting so much time because you had a RAM module that wasn't seated. Something very, very simple. And this was ingrained in my automotive education. And the example the professor gave was that if you have a car that doesn't start because the battery is dead, doesn't mean you have a bad battery. You could have a loose belt, and the loose belt isn't turning the alternator enough, so it's not charging the battery, and therefore the battery died. And if all you have to do is tighten the belt. Now, in modern cars, that's not really an issue with serpentine belts, but back in the 80s when I went to school to be an automotive mechanic, you had normal belts, and those belts had to be tightened by hand. We didn't have tensioners back then. We had a crowbar and a wrench. And if that's all it took, imagine how foolish you would feel to waste the money to buy a new car battery for $50 or whatever it cost. No big deal to swap it out, but still $50, only to have that battery die. And then you're going, wait a minute, it's only been 2 weeks, why is my battery dead? Then you realize the whole time it was just, all you had to do was tighten a belt. How foolish would you feel? So the diagnostic process doesn't change because of one repair. If I see a number of repairs that start requiring BIOS updates, then I'll change my diagnostic process. I just want to be clear. There is a method to my madness. Always, always, always check the easy things first, or you're going to be working a lot harder than you have to most of the time. The downside, of course, is that when it is a more difficult thing, you will get to it a little later. But, that's your decision to make. It becomes a decision of time, right? It depends if you immediately want to completely dismantle a system, take off a heat sink and replace a CPU as the very first test, you will be right some of the time. If you work in a building, let's say in an office, and they have a bunch of the same computer and they're all exhibiting the same symptom, they probably all have the same problem. But if you're working like I work and you get whatever rolls in the door, there's no rhyme or reason to the repairs. You can see the same symptoms and fix it 17 different ways. A bad power supply, bad RAM, there's so many different things that can cause the exact symptom we were watching. But it is a known, it's very well known that newer AMD CPUs on older AMD motherboards are not going to work unless those older AMD motherboards are updated. And you can't update them unless you have an older chip. If you don't have an older chip, there's nothing you can do other than you reach out to AMD and ask them for a BIOS flash kit. So if you're doing this for a living, ideally you should have those parts in stock. Now, we're restarting one more time. You'll see I haven't touched anything. I've been talking the whole time, just trying to bide my time, waiting for the system to get through to what it needs to do. And then ideally, we'll get back in the BIOS here in a moment, maybe. And we should see the latest BIOS version is 51E, and it does in fact say it is 51E. So we're going to quit the BIOS here and we'll go ahead and let it boot one more time. And I feel pretty confident that buying this used discounted board from Amazon was probably a really smart purchase, because I suspect there's absolutely nothing wrong with it other than it had a very, very old BIOS. I think the original BIOS on day one that this motherboard came with, if I look through the list, looks like it was F1. So F1 was released in July of 2018. So this board is 2 years old, which is hard to believe. July 24th, 2018 is when BIOS version F1 was released. And this had BIOS version F5, which was released 6 months later. Yeah, almost exactly 6 months later. And now version that we put on 51E, that was released in July of 2020, July 2nd of 2020. So we're looking from July 24th from the original BIOS to July of 2020. So almost nearly 2 years on the nose. That is an older board. Now that we've successfully booted into Windows, I can shut the system back down one more time. And I also want to bring up another point while we're talking about diagnostics, because I think there's a big key piece that, and I think it's coming from younger viewers, so this is primarily for my younger viewers. If I did the BIOS flashing first, if that was the first thing I did, then how do you learn the diagnostic process? As an instructor trying to teach, am I benefiting you by giving you the walkthrough of the game? In other words, by just going right to the solution, assuming I knew it, right? Let's just assume I'm Mr. Know-it-all. And let's just assume I am just magical when it comes to diagnosing systems. I am the best. I can look at anything and identify what the problem is. How do you learn from that? How does that benefit you? You might go, wow, that's really impressive. How does he do that? How do you teach that? How do you, if I was that good, if anybody exists that can do that, there's clearly something intuitive there that can't be explained. So if we're going to teach a lesson, then I'm going to show you in real life how real techs who do field service, who work on anything that roll in the door, run through a series of diagnostics, because every system is different. We don't know what a customer did or didn't do. We don't know the history of the system. We've never seen the system before, and we'll never likely see the system ever again if we fixed it right. So if we go through a set series of diagnostics, regardless of the history of the system or our familiarity with the system, then I do believe that there is education there that you can utilize yourself. But if I give you a very specific set of instructions to fix a very specific problem on a very specific set of hardware, How does that benefit you unless all of those same circumstances apply? What have you learned? So I think the key is in persistence, it's in critical thinking and logic, and it's in the process of elimination. This is not a video game where we're looking to be the first or we're looking to level up. This is a diagnostic process where we learn from the results of the tests. And we start with the easy tests because in my experience, most problems are relatively easy. And on occasion, you will get a couple of challengers. But for the most part, the easy problems are often overthought by people too smart for their own good. And they refuse to acknowledge something as simple as a cable or a plug or reseating a part could possibly be causing all of their headaches. And they just dismantle everything and they get frustrated and they get angry. That's usually when I get the call and I have to calm them down and I have to take a look at it unemotionally and say, okay, let's just try the basics. And they will scoff. They'll just be like, you must think I'm an idiot. I don't think you're an idiot. I think you're overthinking. Let's just humor me. You've asked me for my help. Now humor me. I could be completely wrong, but I'm not going to change my diagnostic process because you've concluded it doesn't apply. I need to conclude it doesn't apply, right? So when you ask me for my help, we're going to do it my way. If you don't want to do it my way, don't ask me for my help. We'll both be happier. Sometimes helping people can be the most frustrating thing. And again, most problems I deal with are simple. They really are simple problems. People generally aren't so simple, but the problems are usually simple. All right, now that we have concluded, we had an old BIOS. I'm going to flip the power supply off here, and we're going to replace the CPU back to how it was. Now again, I am not going to change any thermal material at this time. You will see that most of the thermal material is still on the old CPU. In the new CPU, just a little tiny bit was left on it. Not much transferred off onto it. Still relatively clean. And I don't want to go too far. And I see people do this too. They put the whole system together and then it doesn't work. So I don't want to go too far with setting everything up until I know it all is going to work okay. And we still have plenty of thermal compound. There's clearly no shortage of it. You see it's on my fingers now because it's on the CPU. And I don't like using my electric driver to screw these heat sinks down. However, I'm going to in this one because I'm in a bit of a hurry and I need to know how to proceed. And I feel pretty confident I'm not going to ruin anything. By the way, if I do ruin something, it's my responsibility to replace it at my cost. That's not my customer's problem. So if you want to be lazy and use an electric driver and you end up causing a problem as a result, you have yourself to blame. So I'm going to do this completely differently because I just want to make sure the system's going to boot now. We'll flip this power supply back on. And we'll put the HDMI cable back into the graphics card. I'm going to flip you back over to camera 2. Oh, I always grab the wrong mouse. Let's put me in the corner again. We'll go right over there. And then here we go with the power switch. You'll see the fans are turning on the, oh, I guess I can stand over here. And should post. It's taking a while. It's taking too long in my opinion, but I'm going to let it sit for a minute. And then this takes us back to, comments like, well, I bet you'll check the BIOS first next time. May not be a BIOS issue. I'm not seeing any different behavior now putting the original CPU back in. And of course, this has me very curious. And this is why I did not reapply thermal paste, for this very possibility that what if the system isn't fixed because of this? Then what? What's the next plan? So I'm going to turn it back off. I'm going to try one other thing, and that is I just want to make sure that my HDMI cable's in all the way. Sometimes they feel like they're in and they're not. I want to make sure that I haven't nudged any of the power cables out of their connectors. And then I'm going to try one more time, give it every opportunity to post. And if it doesn't post, I'm going to try yet another CPU, but we'll find out here in just a minute. Yeah, we're not getting anywhere with this. That's fascinating. So remember, we've swapped the RAM, we've swapped the power supply, and we've swapped the CPU. We've also got a different motherboard. But remember, AMD's the better bargain, right? Yeah, we're not posting. It ain't happening. So, what do we do now, right? That becomes the question. What happens now? Well, first let me go full screen. And let's cut power to the board. And let's take the CPU fan back off. And some people are asking about checking the pins on the bottom of the CPU. I have no reason to suspect those pins would be damaged. I'm the one who installed it, I'm the one who's handled it, and the owner of the computer never took the CPU out of the socket. I don't see any problems with any of the pins under there. They all look pretty straight to me. And of course, I really need glasses to see it better. They're very small. And I put my glasses down somewhere. Somewhere. I need glasses to find my glasses. Huh? You know what I'm talking about? It looks fine. It really does look fine. Maybe the whole system's been misdiagnosed this whole time. Maybe there's some kind of weird incompatibility with Gigabyte's NVMe drive and the MSI motherboard. And maybe the MSI motherboard is fine, but we have a CPU that's flaky. Very unusual, however, possible. Now, I'm not somebody who likes to jump at possibilities. I much prefer probable versus possible, right? What is probable is much more reasonable to me than what is possible. A lot of things are possible. A comet can fall out of the sky and crash into my house and crush me while I'm live on YouTube. Not probable, but it's possible. So here's what I'm going to do. Follow me on, well, you can't follow me. I'm going to go back to my office and I'm going to look through my pile of parts. And I know I've got some Ryzen CPUs laying about. What do I have? What do I have? I've got a 3900X. I've got a 3400G. And I've got, what else do I have? I have a 3950. That's all I have for Ryzen. I don't have very many Ryzens. I'm surprised I have that many, to be honest. So this is the 3400G. Now this has the built-in Vega 11 graphics. And that may be close enough to the 3600. It was interesting because at the time when I was building, I had the 3600 and the 3600X. And I asked my friend, if he preferred one over the other, and he said, yeah, go for the X, right? Because the X is better. But if he'd have gone with the non-X, maybe he wouldn't be having this problem if, in fact, we're having a weird CPU issue. So the only way I know that is by putting in another, 3 series Ryzen, which would be this 3400X. That'd be the closest thing that I have. I think, I thought I had, what did I do with the original 3600? See, now you got me thinking about this. I can't remember. I did something with it. Did I build something with it? I don't even remember anymore. There's a possible I have another stack somewhere and I'm not seeing it. I must have used it. It had to have been. What is this? Wait a minute. What's this? AMD, Ryzen. It's an empty box. 3900X. Well, what to do? I guess we're just going to go with the 3400G for now. And I'll talk to my friend and see what he wants to do. How about that? How's that? Oh, Ron says the 3600 is in the Thermaltake glass case. Oh, yeah. I totally forgot about that. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that's still back in my office. It's on a shelf and it's buried behind some stuff. And I'm not going to take it apart to take the 3600 out of it because I'm just too lazy. It works. I'm leaving it alone. Ron, right on. You nailed it. That's exactly where it went. Okay, so let's do the. How do you feel about the 3400G, Ron? How do you feel? You're gonna be okay with that? You're gonna be disappointed? I don't mind. I'll order another 3600X or I'll RMA this other one if we have a bad CPU here, which I am starting to suspect strongly. I mean, is there really going to be any noticeable gaming difference or usage difference between a 3400G and a 3600X? Well, this is different. They totally package this different. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer to go, well, do you want the most powerful one, or do you want the more powerful one, or do you want the least? I mean, it's, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it amounts to, is it going to make a difference in the usability of the computer between a 3400 and a 3600? And you can be honest. Don't worry about hurting my feelings or feeling greedy. I honestly need to know your personal feelings of the 3400G versus the 3600X. Because I want to send you something you're going to love. I don't want to send you something you're going to like. And if that matters to you, then you need to tell me. Okay, here we go. We go back to camera 2. Now we've got the 3400G CPU. We've got the latest BIOS. I'm going to flip the switch on the power supply, and I'm going to hit the power button. Fans are turning. Once again, I'm not playing around with thermal material. We're still testing. We don't want to reapply thermal material until we're absolutely certain the machine's ready to go, and it'll be the last time, that we're putting the heatsink on. Ron says the 3400G is a downgrade from what I'm running now. Well, it may not be an issue anyway, because if the system ain't going to boot, there's something else happening here that's quite interesting. We're getting nowhere. Let me shut this back down. And just for giggles, I'm going to short out the jumper for the to clear the BIOS, just in case that it has somehow decided it wants to be an older it wants to be dedicated to that CPU for some reason. I don't know. I didn't say it was going to make any sense. Where do those pins go? There they are. Okay, so that's going to short out the BIOS. And we'll let that sit on there for a few seconds. And that should be good enough. Take that back off. Plug the CPU back, or plug the power supply back in. Turn it back on. One more time with the switch. And it just doesn't want to do a thing. I'm going to let it run again. Give it a full 60 seconds, 60 to 90 seconds. Just give it the opportunity to reestablish the installed components, the RAM, the CPU, etc. Carbine 15 says the 3600X is 20% better overall than the 3400G. Well, right now they're both sitting at the same performance from where I'm standing. This is a fascinating problem. It seems pretty clear to me we're not going to post. So I'm going to cut power one more time. We're going to go back full screen on camera 1 so you can see what I'm doing. And then we'll come over here to make sure that's fully seated. It is. We're going to pull the CPU out of here. Okay, that's my 3400. Where's my 1500? So we're going to put the 1500 back in. And put it back to the way it was when it posted. RAM hasn't been budged. No, nothing's been budged. Everything's fine. Flip the switch back on. Gonna hit power one more time. Flip over to camera 2. And let's see if we have any more. Now see, I can hear the fans, they get louder, and now they start to quiet down. So there's some sort of initialization that's occurring with this CPU that's not occurring with the other two, which is pretty interesting to me. I suspect it's going to post now because I can hear the fans oscillate. I can hear them ramp up and ramp down. And this is what it did before. Yeah, and there we are. There it is. That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Some double lot bug, how to fix it. Yeah, it's kind of an expensive target though. Blue Dog Ron is encouraging me to see an earlier post, and I guess I'm supposed to go look for it. Oh, there it is. I see this on the Gigabyte website. Before updating the BIOS to F40, you have to install the EC firmware update tool to avoid DDR incompatibility. Let me take a look here. EC firmware update tool. Where's that at? That's interesting. Is that under utilities? So that's really bad support if they don't give me a link to it. Like if they're telling me I've got to download something, but they don't tell me where it is, I'm not exactly sure where I'm supposed to find it. Um, Before updating the BIOS to F40, well, too late, we already did it. You have to install ACFW update tool. Okay, but where is that? Where is that? It's under utilities, ECFW update tool. Okay, well, let's download it and see what it is. Let's extract that. What is that? Apparently you have to be in Windows to use this tool. So I don't know how you're supposed to do that. However, we can do it. I mean, I don't know how a regular person's supposed, like a regular home user is supposed to do that. Let's see what happens. Let me copy those files to the flash drive. I appreciate that tool. I appreciate that tip. I suspect that's not really going to be our issue, but I mean, both third gen Ryzen's didn't boot. Indie Champ 11 has contributed $10. He says, this engineer and PC nerd enjoys your diagnostic techniques, life experiences, and dog feedings. Thank you, and greetings from the sandy beaches in Yuma, Arizona. Your next Coke is on me. Enjoy. And that's from Ariel. Thank you, Ariel. Welcome to Being Blue. I appreciate your contribution and, more importantly, your kind words. And I like that you get what I'm doing over here. Not everybody gets it. Let me go back to this flash drive. And I'm going to plug it in now that I've copied the firmware update tool for whatever the heck that is. And I need to make the screen bigger here. Let's see. Let me go full screen. There it is. Got to use the right mouse. You know what? Let's just copy this whole folder. I don't want to run it off a flash drive. Paste that over here. I don't know which one to run. Let's try this one. That doesn't really give me any information. What does this do? Says it verifies okay. Says it passes. I don't know. We'll try one more time, and one way or another, I'm going to wrap it up. It's getting a bit late here. It's 10:30 at night, and I'll have to, if this doesn't fix it, then we'll have to pick it up another day. All right, let's go back to camera 1 and flip the power supply off, take the flash drive out. And one more time, I'm going to pull CPU. That's our 1500, which this one, I can read that one, so that can't be the original. This has got to be our original here with all the thermal compound all over it. So that's the 3600X put back in, heatsink back on. Okay, I don't know. That's weird. I've never had to do that before. If that makes a difference, I'll be surprised, but I'm happy to be surprised. All right, so we're going to go back to camera 2 here. I'm not hearing the fans ramping up and down. Try and move myself into a corner here. Yeah, there's something's not right. Yeah, I'm not sure. Let me flip this off literally. I want to put the original RAM back in it just because I can. How about one RAM module? What if we just do one? Oh, it's going to post. I'm sure the microphone's not picking that up, but I just heard the fans ramp up and ramp down again. And they ramped up again, and I think it's going to post. Yeah, yeah, I'm hearing the fan. It's going up, it's waving. It's like a wave, it's up and down. So it's initializing, it's doing something. There it is. That's interesting. Stuff like this, I'm so glad I'm filming it. I'm so glad you guys get to watch this sort of, it's not just one thing, right? It's just one thing after the other. Okay, so I'm going to put the other RAM module in it. So give me 1 second here. Let's do that. Well, that's weird. So that red G-Skill RAM was the replacement RAM that I had sent. The RAM that I've put back in is the original RAM I built the system with. We're going to go back in here, we flip the switch off on the power supply, put the other RAM module in. Okay, back on and power. There we go. Ideally, this should boot up, should recognize all the memory now. Yeah, I'm hearing the fans wave up and down. My friend Ron says the red G-Skill RAM kit had a bad stick of RAM. Oh, I thought he was telling me the original RAM had a bad stick, so we had a little miscommunication there. Okay. All right, so here's the way we're going to wrap this up. Let me go full screen so I can talk to you. Okay, so we apparently have either a bad stick of RAM, which doesn't explain why it works with the 1500 CPU, right? The same bad RAM worked just fine with the 1500 CPU. However, the new board, which is used from Amazon, had an old BIOS. So the old BIOS had to be updated twice, right, in order to get the latest BIOS. And then when we tried any 3 series CPU, then the bad RAM seemed to appear. It's very odd. Now this coming from an MSI board, and the MSI board was freezing randomly, which takes us back to wondering, did we have a bad motherboard all along? I suspect we did. And it leads to this diagnostic conclusions shifting and changing as we learn more. And the way we're learning more is through trying different things and seeing the results. And as more results come in, we can refine our diagnostic. So yes, I'm going to stick to the original diagnostic, which I stated from the very get-go, which was, believe we have a bad motherboard. The replacement RAM I sent my friend was apparently incompatible. I don't know. There's something funky going on. He thinks it's a bad stick. I'm not convinced yet until I try it in another system, but there's definitely something not compatible with the 3 series Zen architecture than with the original Zen architecture, because that RAM clearly worked fine. So something's weird there. Doesn't mean it's bad RAM, but we'll put the RAM in another system. I'm going to run memtest 86 on the system. Well, it's out of the case. It's going to take a couple hours to run. And then I'm going to put the motherboard back into the case and hook it all back up. And I'll revisit you tomorrow with an update. That's going to wrap it up for me for tonight and the late night broadcast. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this little adventure. I hope it was entertaining and educational, and you can understand how sometimes fixing your own problems can get quite expensive if you have to buy power supply and buy a motherboard and buy RAM and buy spare CPUs. We've got enough spare parts to build a whole nother system practically. I just need a case. But because I do this for a living, these spare parts exist for the very purpose of testing that a normal home user wouldn't have. And while I encourage you to be self-reliant and to solve your own issues, there gets to be a point where it doesn't make financial sense to keep pursuing buying more parts. And not only that, it takes a lot of time. If you have to order parts, wait for them to arrive, say you did a power supply, doesn't make a difference, then you want to send the power supply back, wait for your refund. It can take you a month to get your system up and running, whereas I just did this whole diagnostic in 3 hours. So it looks like everything is sorted out, and it's important if you're building an AMD system. Obviously, the BIOS updates are critical, and having compatible RAM is also very important. If this passes memtest 86, I'm going to remove the cooler, clean it, and reapply thermal compound. Then it'll go back into the case. Everything will be hooked up the way I originally did it from the get-go. And again, I will revisit you tomorrow, and we'll have the system all assembled and ideally working, unless I run into any obstacles. If something happens that again is unexpected, then I will leave it to share with you till we can pursue that together. But if everything works going forward, there's no reason to film what is basically what I've already done. And we'll keep our fingers crossed that we can move on to new projects. So my thanks again to all of my friends in blue for keeping it civil in the chat room tonight and keeping me company. My thanks to everybody who's contributed. I've missed a bunch of contributions. I want to shout out thank you to Susan Harris, who's contributed $5 and says, this old 2011 HP is about to be put out to pasture, but while she's still up and running, I love to watch you work, Carrie. Big hugs. Thank you, Susan. Indie Champ 11 contributed $10. That one I mentioned. Sterling contributed $2 and said, Blue Dog Ron says, BIOS F40 had additional steps. Yeah, I don't think that really applied here for the reasons we've talked about, but thank you. Didn't hurt. Peanut Butterfly contributed $5. Says, I have that motherboard. If customer has problems enabling XMP, try having them slow it down to 3200. I don't think XMP was enabled because we reset the BIOS with an update, but it's something I'll check. Paul Ware had contributed $5 and says, how do you know that when you reset the BIOS, it didn't go back to F5? Resetting a BIOS only resets the settings. It doesn't replace the BIOS. It simply clears out the individual settings back to defaults. As far as I know, there's no way to revert to a prior version of a BIOS without reflashing it. I know Gigabyte has a dual BIOS that could reactivate, but it won't just happen in an instant. You'll see information on the screen. A BIOS update takes time, and we never had the system on for that amount of time that would allow it to run from a backup BIOS. And of course, we can go back into the BIOS and check it at any point, but I've never in my life seen a BIOS revert versions without some indication on the screen that it was happening. And it's strictly Gigabyte with dual BIOS that can even make that a possibility. Jose and Veronica Lopez with a $5 contribution says, thank you, Master Carey, for sharing your well-earned knowledge. Well, I appreciate that you appreciate it. And again, my thanks to Abdul, Azim Patel, Daniel Laser, Richard Angeline, David Starbuck, David, our officer, Ghost Shadow, and B-Jet Pilot, Ian McLeod, Richard Angeline again, David Starbuck again, Michael Dane again, Rick Lakes, thank you, South Bay Technology Gurus, and Susan Harris again, Farrell Sparky, John Rudgis, again from David Starbuck, another generous contribution from Frankie B. Frankie, thanks for all of your support. David again tonight with another contribution. Rusty Nail, David, our officer, again earlier today, and the first contribution during today's broadcast was from Ian McLeod, who says, Slancha. Slancha back at you, my friend. Thank you guys again for joining me. I will see you all again tomorrow. And until then, I've got it here somewhere. I've got an outro. There it is. Until then, bye for now.